In God's economy, children are always, without exception, a blessing. I've been blessed 8 times over. Children become a wonderful source of the way in which God works in your life, teaches you, instructs you. I think of this third grade teacher in a public classroom. She said to her students, and it gave them an assignment, said, I want you to draw a picture of an historic event. And so the kids set to pencil and paper and they're drawing, and the teacher was walking through the classroom looking at what the students were doing, and she came upon this one student who was drawing a picture of a whale in Jonah. And she says to the student, so what are you drawing here? He just says, well, I'm drawing a picture of Jonah and the whale. And she said, no, I'm sorry, but you didn't really understand what I instructed you to do. I told you to draw something that happened in real history. And so the little girl said to her, well, this happened in real history. And the teacher said, no, you don't understand. This couldn't have happened because you can't get swallowed by a whale and be there for 3 days. And she started to explain the science. And the girl said, well, I believe it happened. And so the teacher said, well, how do you know it happened? And she said, well, when I go to heaven, I'll ask Jonah. The teacher paused for a moment, and with a smile that would rival the Grinch who stole Christmas as he pondered the theft, she said, what if Jonah didn't go to heaven? And the little girl looked up and said, well, then you can ask him. Ouch. You know, when you ever wondered whether God answers all prayer? I mean, really, does God answer all prayer? Well, he does. Sometimes he says yes, sometimes he says no, and sometimes he says wait. But you got to be careful how you pray. You could if you pray for patience, you better duck. He just might give you a kid. So after half a century, and the petitions of millions of Christians, God has answered the prayer, and Roe v. Wade is overturned. Now, we live in a country, as Abraham Lincoln said in the Gettysburg Address, as a nation under God, which at that moment he was giving tribute to the soldiers who had died in the Battle of Gettysburg, that this nation would be reborn after this battle over slavery as a nation of the people, by the people, and for the people. And this unique experiment of a nation, which stands to this day, is a people who gets to get, in terms of its government, what it asks for. So while God answered the prayer of Roe v. Wade, the fact that Roe v. Wade exists is precisely because of the decisions that people made and the officials that were elected and the judges that were appointed. And the fact that it was reversed is in part because of the same reason. So a great responsibility in our nation in particular falls upon us because the philosophy and the values that this nation embraced in Roe v. Wade was exported into the world, and the embracing of abortion spread throughout the world. Now, when the court on Friday reversed Roe versus Wade, they didn't say that abortion was bad, although in the ruling they were talking about the fact that it's not just about a woman's body, but it's about 2 bodies, 2 human beings that are involved in this decision-making process. But it just simply pushed the decision down to the states so that the representatives, the choice of the people, would be the people who would make the decision. That Roe v. Wade was, in fact, a terrible ruling. It was sort of a Shazam type of ruling, a judicial legislation that just said, well, this is the way it's going to be. It's not grounded in any solid reason. It's not grounded in any kind of precedent, because there were no states, very few states, that legalized abortion except for New York, to become the first state to legalize abortion in 1970. And so the first abortion clinic opened in Syracuse on the day after the law was passed in New York State, as if there wasn't some kind of collusion, a Planned Parenthood that stands to this day. And so with the reversal, what they were basically saying was that this law is a bad law. It was founded on wrong thinking and wrong principles. It needs to be thrown out completely. It isn't the only time the Supreme Court has got it profoundly wrong. But nevertheless, it's important to understand that the law is a great teacher. It tells us what is right and what is wrong. And for half a century, for multiple generations, the law has said to the people of America that abortion is good and must be protected. And it has duped countless women into making terribly regrettable decisions. If there's one thing that you would walk away with today, it would be this: that God's mercy, God's love, God's forgiveness, God's kindness, Jesus' death on the cross is bigger than abortion. With 62 million abortions in this country, there isn't a congregation that doesn't have people in it who have been directly affected or involved in abortion. And so God's mercy and love is the message that I would hope you walk away with above anything else I say today. And so as we look at the question of abortion and the laws that have formed it, and we look at what it means, we ask ourselves as Christians, why are we pro-life? We're pro-life because we believe that from the moment of conception, that every human being is made in the image of God, is of immeasurable value, and worthy of protection without qualification. And from this reality, we understand the sacredness of human life. You know, when a child is formed in the womb at the moment of conception, it doesn't need anything else added to it. All it needs is food, water, and shelter. Those three things. That's it from that point forward. A number of people, because of my position, have asked me, well, when does a child become viable and able to survive on its own? And I say usually around age 22. Hopefully. It needs food, water, and shelter provided by someone else up until that point, right? And so it's important as Christians to understand what really is behind the abortion problem. Yes, it is the sanctity of life, but what is the spiritual battle going on even behind the sanctity of life? It's really all about God's design of the world, of how he designed human beings. That if you were to look at what is the satanic plan is to make society bad. And a society is bad when it's easy to be bad and difficult to be good. A society is good that it's easy to be good and difficult to be bad. So how do you make society difficult to be good and easy to be bad? Well, you attack its foundation. And the foundation of society is the family. And if you want to destroy the family, what do you attack? The foundation of the family, and that is marriage. If you want to destroy marriage, you attack its foundation, which is the sexuality between the two people, the glue that holds them together. And so this is what we see in our culture today. That it's ultimately comes down to an approach to sexuality free of its consequence. God has designed sex and sexuality to generate not just human beings, but immortals. In the womb, there are no mere mortals. Each one of us is an immortal being. And so God gave us, as human beings, the right and ability to create immortal beings. And so abortion is about separating that possible consequence from the act of sexuality. And to separate God's design without consequence. So I can have the freedom to do whatever I want and not worry about the context in which God has created this. And so we see that in the fiat law of redesigning marriage. To say that it isn't as God designed it, between one man and one woman, to be fruitful and to multiply and populate the world. That no, we're going to redesign it and define it as something else, as if government could define marriage. We're now at a point where we're saying, well, God, you created me as a man or a woman, and well, I can decide that. I can say that I'm a man or a woman regardless of how I've been created, putting me in the position of my own creator. And so this is what's at stake, so that when it comes to questions of nominations for the last 50 years to the Supreme Court, we've seen all hell break loose when it comes to scrutinizing these people as they are being nominated and they're attacked. Because what's at stake is this very fundamental principle about society. And so the stakes are high. Abortion is this unholy sacrament of the far left. It is a blood sacrifice, which embodies the very thing of ultimate freedom at the cost of a life. And so, what has this inspired? A new form of terrorism. It's called abortion terrorism. There's even a group called Jane's Revenge who exists, and in fact, on June 7th, firebombed Compass Care's Buffalo office. So their intent was to stop what was happening, to shut down services. But because of the generosity of God's people and the diligence of the nursing staff at Compass Care didn't miss a single day of serving women. The firebombing occurred at about 3 o'clock in the morning. And fortunately, the firefighters, the police were on alert, even watching out for something like this. They got there quickly. They contained the fire. There was extensive damage throughout the building in terms of smoke damage. There was fire damage in one room, water damage in a couple others, putting the building completely out of commission. That morning, we got a call from a woman in the Buffalo area looking to do what is called an abortion pill reversal. Now, what that is that they're not uncommon requests from the standpoint that a woman goes into Planned Parenthood trying to figure out, well, what am I going to do? I'm in an unplanned pregnancy. What am I going to do? So by the time she leaves the office, they've told her, well, you can start your abortion now. Take these pills. What these pills do is they fool the woman's body. They're a hormone. Fool her into thinking she's not pregnant. And so her body ceases feeding the baby. So it starves to death. And the subsequent set of pills puts her into labor to expel that baby. And so women will take these, they're under the pressure of the situation, the people in the room. They take these pills, they go home, and all of a sudden they say, what am I doing? And they regret it. And they look for an opportunity to do an abortion pill reversal, which Compass Care does. And so a woman called on that Tuesday morning, and we were able to get her to the Rochester office, and that abortion was reversed. There was another medical facility that opened their doors to allow Compass Care to operate in an undisclosed location that's secure to continue to serve women the day after. Christians have come forward and they've cleaned up the facility, and the expectation is it will not only be operational in Buffalo in July, but we'll have expanded the building by 30% to accommodate the overwhelming number of women who are coming to Compass Care. It's important to understand, why would a woman seek an abortion? No woman grows up aspiring to the day that she gets an abortion. She finds herself with an unplanned pregnancy and feels that she needs to have an abortion. She feels as though she's unsupported, and ironically, that she doesn't have a choice. And so all the circumstances in her life are pressuring her. There are typically three. Compass Care sees women experiencing three major tensions. The primary major tension is the tension between this child's life and her life. What her expectations are for her future, her education, her relationships. What does this mean for my relationship with the father of this child, with my parents, with my future marriage, with my career, my education? All these things come crashing down, and the tension is overwhelming, and she doesn't able to even tell anybody she's facing this pregnancy, and she feels unsupported. Or she might find herself in a situation in her life where she already sees her life as a kind of train wreck. But I'm going to bring another child into this situation, or a child into, so it's a tension between no life for the child or a bad life, and she feels stuck. Or she's caught between the tension of shame and guilt. The guilt of killing this child, or the shame of being pregnant. Now, it's not the same kind of shame that existed, say, 20, 30 years ago, where being pregnant out of wedlock was considered shameful. That's long since that train has debarked from the station a long time ago. Now it's the shame of letting myself get pregnant and not getting an abortion. That's shame in our culture. And so she faces all of these tensions and the various combinations of all of these things. And so the nurse comes alongside her with unconditional love, to love on her, to hear her story, and to do what Jesus does. Because every encounter that Jesus has in the scriptures, Jesus is about transforming their understanding of who God is, of who they are in God's eyes, of who the people are around them, and understanding their circumstances from God's perspective. And when people lay a hold of God's perspective, it not only changes what they believe, it changes what they do. So Compass Care will share the gospel with every woman who is willing to hear it. And amazingly enough, 85 to 90% say yes. And of them, about a third will pray to receive Jesus as their Lord and Savior. In 2021, Compass Care saw 1,073 patients. 459 of them chose to carry to term. 257 prayed to receive the Lord Jesus Christ. We see this kind of transformation in every encounter that Jesus has. And I'm going to invite you to listen to the gospel of Luke chapter 10. And in the tradition of Pastor David, I'm going to invite you to stand as we hear God's word. And behold, a certain lawyer stood up and made trial. I can't read that from here, so I'm going to have to look down. Behold, a lawyer stood up and put him to the test, saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" And he said to him, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" And he answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have answered correctly. Do this and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, he said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied and said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, And he encountered robbers, and they stripped him and beat him and went away, leaving him half dead. By coincidence, a priest was going down the road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise, a Levite also, when he came by to that place, he saw him and passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan who was on a journey came upon him, and when he saw him, he felt compassion and came to him, bandaged up his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them. And he put him in his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day, he took out 2 denarii, and he gave them to the innkeeper and said, "Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I return, I will repay you." Which of these 3 do you think proved to be neighbor to the man who fell into robbers' hands? And he said, "The one who showed him compassion." Then Jesus said to him, "Go and do the same." Please be seated. Now, the context of this story is interesting. You have this lawyer who comes up to Jesus. He's a professional in the law. He knows what the scriptures say. And he comes challenging Jesus, as they often did, trying to put him into a trap, and asks him, "Well, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus, in classic rabbinic style, doesn't answer the question, but answers it with a question. Puts it back on him. Says, "You read the scriptures. You tell me." And he says, "Well, love God and love your neighbor." And Jesus says, "Bingo." Well, actually, that's not exactly what he said. That's the Catholic translation. He said, "Good answer. Do that and you shall live." But then, in a really kind of interesting twist, because he's standing in front of the judge of the universe. He says, wishing to justify himself. Not a good idea. But he goes, "Well, who's my neighbor?" And Jesus launches into the story. And there's this guy gets robbed, stripped, left for dead. And the first person who comes along is the priest. And he sees what's happening here, and he crosses to the other side of the road like, "Nothing to see here. I got to do my thing." Now, to understand the significance of this priest, the priest is the guy who speaks to God on behalf of the people and to the people on behalf of God. He's the high holy guy of the culture. He doesn't want to get involved. He doesn't want to get into this messy situation. It's too messy. The next guy who comes along is a Levite. Now, the Levites were one of the 12 tribes of Israel. And it says in the scriptures that all of them inherited land except for the Levites, because their inheritance was the Lord. And so their responsibility was to take care of the worship and the temple. And it would be out of them that the priesthood would come, the Levitical priesthood. And so these were the holy guys of Israel, the religious guys who were involved in the worship aspect of the congregation. And does the exact same thing. Nothing to see here. I'm not getting involved. I got my religious things to do. I got to pay my tithes and worship. I don't want to get involved in this messy thing. And then comes along the Samaritan. Now, it doesn't take a deep reading of the scriptures to realize there's serious enmity between Jews and Samaritans. But it goes back hundreds of years. There was this people, the Assyrians, who invaded the northern kingdom. And the northern kingdom is where the Samaritans are now. But they conquered and obliterated the tribes of Israel in the northern kingdom, never to ever again be restored. And they were a people who believed that their God was happy with them because they believed their God was a warrior God. And so when they conquered other people, they believed that's how they made their God happy. Pretty twisted. But nevertheless, this is what they did. And so they conquered the northern kingdom. They literally tortured and killed all the soldiers. And then what they did was they took half of the population and exported that population into the far reaches of their conquered kingdom. And then they took people from that land and imported them into the newly conquered region. It was a philosophy based on the conviction that people wouldn't rise up and revolt in a land that was not their own. Now, these people who came from these far kingdoms and places in their conquered areas brought not only themselves, they brought their religious practices. And over time, their religious beliefs and practices were synchronized with the Jewish practices of the north. And so the Jews of the south that were never conquered looked upon the Jews of the north as religiously defiled and compromised. But not only did these people bring their religious practices, they brought their gene pool. And in their marriage and intermarrying, these people were genetically impure. Now, Jesus identifies himself with this Samaritan. Now, the lawyer doesn't know this because this is pre-cross. But Jesus is the one who lifts up us dead on the side of the road, who gets into our lives and guarantees payment for our full healing and restoration. So Jesus is identifying himself with this Samaritan. But he's also saying something else. He's saying that no one group of people can look upon another group of people as less than human, as less deserving the rights of what it means to be a human being. And when these things happen, the greatest atrocities in the world happen. We see it throughout history, whether it's the genocides of Africa or Asia or Europe, whether it's slavery in our own country. It's rooted in this attitude about one group of people towards another, that this group of people is less worthy of what it means to be human. In the decision of Roe v. Wade, Justice Harry Blackmun wrote these words. He said that the word person cannot be applied to the unborn child. And as a result, classified a whole segment of our population as less than human. And we've seen the consequences since. Now, with this reversal of Roe v. Wade, abortion doesn't go away. It falls into the hands of states and for the electorate to choose their representatives to make the laws. But in places like Texas, where they have already essentially outlawed abortion, women will still get their abortions. They will travel out of state to get them. And so you have people like Governor Hochul, who has said, literally, the arms of Lady Liberty welcome you into New York State to get your abortion. And she's pushing to provide funding for these women to travel here. In addition, companies like Google will pay their employees to travel out of the states they're in to get their abortions. Heck, it's cheaper than maternity leave. Think about the pragmatic attitude that carries with it. But not only will women travel out of state to get their abortions, they'll get them online. During COVID, the Biden administration relaxed the ability for women to get the abortion pill online. And so now the fastest growing abortion industry is online, with just last year over 52 new abortion providers that work online have come into business and are now providing abortions online. So Compass Care started actually literally back in 1980 in Rochester, and then in the 2000s became the first pregnancy center in New York State to become medicalized. And what that means is that all the services that women receive are provided by medical professionals, registered nurses overseen by an OBGYN. And they also created a model of service called a linear model of service to help these women through the decision-making process. As a result, Rochester saw the greatest reduction in abortion than any other major city in the United States. 50% reduction between 2008 and 2018. Because of that success, Compass Care has literally coached over 650 pregnancy centers throughout the country to adopt a medical model and to improve their services and to use a linear model. Now, Compass Care is in the process of launching a telecare platform to compete against the abortion industry online. Initially, the vision was to launch it in Rochester and Buffalo. Now the vision is to do it nationwide. and to collaborate with these 650 pregnancy centers so that what happens is that when a woman is thinking about abortion, she Googles, she finds Compass Care, she calls them up, she connects with a nurse, and the nurse helps her through the decision-making process by saying, hey, look, you need to find out some things. You need to find out, you're really pregnant. Is that pregnancy viable? Do you have a sexually transmitted disease? Because if you go ahead with an abortion with one of those, it's bad news. You could get pelvic inflammatory disease. All sorts of complications can ensue. You need to know how far along you are in order for you to decide the kind of procedures that you're facing. You also need to find out what those procedures involve. So that's why they come to Compass Care, to get information for free. We've actually, since online abortions have been occurring, Compass Care has seen some women coming in that are coming in just to get their ultrasounds for free. Now, we maybe feel used by that, but we're delighted they're showing up because they still get all the same services. So envision this happening nationwide, collaborating with hundreds of pregnancies across the country to make a major difference. And so what the enemy meant for ill, God has made for good. That this moment of abortion terrorism is now propelling the country into a nationwide platform to serve women and to save babies. Last year, I was sitting in the dentist office with my 3 youngest children, and my 2 boys were in the dentist chairs being served, and my daughter, Rebecca, and I were sitting in the waiting room alone. And I turned to her and said, let's make a list of all the problems that our country has, like you do as a father. And so we came up with a list of 35. And that included everything from crime to poverty, to homelessness, to drug abuse, to sexism, to racism, you name it. It was all in there. And for each one of these, there were government organizations trying to solve those problems. There were secular organizations trying to solve those problems. There were faith-based organizations trying to solve those problems, except for one: abortion. It's only faith-based organizations that care. It's only Christians who actually see that it is a problem, let alone work to solve it as a problem. And so we as Christians are called at this time of change in a positive way, but the battle intensity will rage even harder and hotter. When the American Revolution was at a low point, when things looked desperate, Thomas Paine penned The Crisis, and it began with these words: "These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will at this time shrink back from the service of his God and country. But those who stand will deserve the thanks and love of men and women." God has answered a great prayer, but it is also his people who do the hard work of serving women and saving lives. If you want to become involved with Compass Care, there are lots of ways to do it. There is prayer. For every woman that walks out of the office of Compass Care undecided about her future of her baby, we send out an email in order for you to pray for her. We change the names and obscure her identity, but give you enough information to know how to pray. If you want to serve, come to a vision tour. Find out what Compass Care is all about. They run twice a month. And look at the opportunities where you can become involved. It's going to expand as things go to a national platform. Or obviously, you can give. So pray, serve, and give. These are the opportunities. God is doing a good thing in our nation. God has helped us move around a corner of half a century of a tremendous systemic injustice that has plagued our nation and the world. But now has provided us an opportunity as a Christian community to do something and to make a difference. Thank you.